We know that inflation is high, that the prices of certain commodities like oil are very high. In fact, for oil specifically, it hit a record price earlier this week on Tuesday. But why is that? Well, there's a lot of different explanations for it depending on who you ask, and there's probably truth to all of these. A few of the explanations that have been given include Republicans blaming just Joe Biden, like in general, or rising wages, of course, because workers have to be responsible for all of society's ills. Democrats blame corporate price gouging, or in the case of oil, Vladimir Putin, and there's probably a little bit of all of that in there somewhere, but there is one explanation that certainly is influencing this that basically nobody at this point is talking about. And Jonathan Larson did a write-up about this on tyt.com, and we're gonna do our best to give you at least an intro to this idea. Basically, what is happening is that internationally, people with tons of money are betting on the price of these commodities, and they're able to do so and get away with it and influence inflation on these commodities thanks to a little bit of a loophole in the law that came about after the financial breakdown of a decade and a half ago. And let me walk you through how we got to this point and how Donald Trump specifically has made sure that that loophole remains and that it is able to continue to influence inflation here in the US. So back in 2010, you had the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act. And as specific regulations were starting to be made in response to that, Wall Street got involved. Of course they're going to. They're not going to allow them to be regulated 1 inch more than needs to be from their point of view. So they tried to create these loopholes that would allow them to do things like do these swaps and derivatives and keep those out of the new regulations. And they were successful. So let's talk about these swaps, and I'll give you a very basic idea of what those are. So unlike futures contracts, which are a whole big other topic, which are ostensibly just promises to buy or sell commodities at a later date, swaps aren't traded on one of the big commodity exchanges. Swaps are one-to-one deals. Almost all of them involve a big Wall Street or private equity firm. These are not things regular people generally do. They're essentially bets on commodity prices. Now, they've only been around for a few decades. They were sort of invented back in the 1980s, and initially traders were wary of them. There was actually something that was too risky even for them. So in 1999, the International Swaps and Derivatives Association made it standard practice for US firms affiliates to back their swaps with a written guarantee that the parent company would stand behind them. Now this is important because these sorts of bets are way inflated over the actual price of these commodities. They are 2 or 10 or 100 times more in value. And so if they go bad, there needs to be somebody actually backing that. Unfortunately, what happened is when there was going to be potentially regulation of this, Wall Street during the Dodd-Frank negotiations created this loophole. What they did was they got the Commodity Futures Trading Commission to do a policy that only covered explicit guarantees. They're calling them explicit. So Wall Street could keep trading outside of the jurisdiction of the CFTC as long as its swaps were traded by ostensibly non-US affiliates that had been guaranteed, not in writing, but with a wink and a nod. So effectively, as long as technically the organizations or individuals that were doing this trading weren't US based, you could do it. Even if they were US based and the deals were being made in the United States, if they technically weren't, then you could get away with it. Now, what does this mean? What does technically mean? Well, it's actually laughably easy to get around this. So back in 2013, the CFTC issued its guidance and policy statement, and they had a footnote 563, which is crucial to this entire thing. The CFTC noted that its regulations wouldn't apply if non-US traders explicitly affirmed that they weren't financially backed or guaranteed by a US firm. And all you need to do to qualify for that effectively was, take a look at this graphic, there's a little checkbox that you can mark saying it's not supported by the guarantee, it's not connected to the United States. So what this means in practice is that an American citizen who lives in Greenwich, Connecticut and works for a US firm could go to their office in Manhattan, arrange to negotiate and execute swaps all day long and keep them all from the CFTC just by checking that box that you just saw. So they could get by all of the regulation, all of the requirements of backing that were designed to stop this from collapsing like a house of cards by checking that little box. Now, look, this never should have been instituted, this loophole, but once it should have been taken out under Obama. It wasn't, but it was actually set to be gotten rid of once Obama transitioned out of power. Unfortunately, Donald Trump succeeded him, and as we can get into, Donald Trump stopped this from happening. Him and people like Steve Mnuchin and others made sure that that loophole remained, and so we continue to be affected by it to today.
Okay, so this has tons of ramifications, and let me just sum it up in normal speak. Okay,
I tried.
I know, and the article is brilliant. It's now being passed around the internet, and people are beginning to see, oh my God, this is what actually caused inflation. So the first summary is it was the bankers. So when you have a commodity like oil and you're trading it, and somebody says, hey, you know what, I'm going to charge $7 for it. At some point, especially depending on the supply and demand situation, somebody, if they can, is going to undercut it at $6, right? Well, that's going to affect the entire market once people start undercutting. But the bankers are making bets on that commodity. And it could be oil, it could be tomatoes, it could be sausages, it doesn't matter. In fact, it's most of those commodities. It's not just about oil. But the bankers are making bets that are 100 times larger than the original price. So even when you go to undercut a price, it doesn't move the market at all because the bets they've made have basically taken over the market, and they're so much larger. And there's a reason why all of that betting leads to more volatility, because the bankers make money when people trade. Okay, that's why you'll see prices going up and down sometimes in ways that doesn't make any sense. And the more trading there is, the more it pushes the price higher. Now, that's not a rock solid rule, but happens often and is happening now. So all the inflation where they're talking about, by the way, are the supply chain issues real? Yes. Is the Russian invasion affecting the oil market? Yes. But those are smaller factors. This is the larger factor, because whatever is happening to the actual commodities like oil and sugar, the bankers are betting 100 times on top of that, so they're greatly amplifying the problem, and that's what's causing inflation. So Obama administration, as always, took forever and ever and ever to fix the goddamn loophole, because they barely figured it out. As Jonathan explains in the story, by the time they figured it out, there's the bureaucracy and they got to ask permission, and it doesn't matter, they thought, because Hillary Clinton's going to win, she'll just finish it. Oops.
Or maybe some of them didn't mind, really.
Oh, of course, because of the revolving door. You think Democrats, look, Trump definitely took away the regulations. And so is he primarily responsible? Yes, as you can see in the article. But Obama and Biden definitely get fault here as well. Obama could have fixed it, didn't move fast enough to fix it. And by the way, who's president now? Joe Biden. Has he fixed it? Of course not, because nothing will fundamentally change.
When we saw the US first put sanctions on Russia, we were formerly getting a lot of oil from Russia, like 672,000 barrels a day, a lot of oil. And so the oil market was in backwardation. So the spot price of a barrel of oil was higher than a futures price, which means like if you buy a barrel of oil today, you're going to pay more than if you buy one 6 months from now. And typically we see the price of a commodity go up over time. And people were explaining this in a bunch of different ways, that a new variant could come out and maybe people would be sent home again and they would stop driving. And so maybe the price for gas would go back down like it did at the beginning of the pandemic. But another explanation is exactly this, that they inflated the price of oil through Wall Street, treating the economy like a casino, essentially. And what this led to was American oil companies saying, well, if it's likely that the price for a barrel of oil is going to go back down, we're not increasing supply. We're not going to invest in building new rigs and drilling new wells, because we would much rather profit from the high prices instead of making initial investments now on that growth, cutting our profits when the price for a barrel of oil could go back down, which means that now Biden has decided to tap our emergency petroleum reserves. So now we're decreasing domestic supply. We're using our emergency reserves, which in the long run, this is going to make the US more dependent on foreign oil. So this is Donald Trump, America first, and now we're becoming more dependent on foreign oil, and we're raising gas prices for people within the United States. He's doing the exact opposite of what he said he would do by allowing this to happen in Wall Street.
And so I'm going to read graphic 11 here so you know whose fingerprints are on the crime. Steve Mnuchin, that's the Treasury Secretary for Trump, and his counselor Craig Phillips write that the CFTC should, quote, reconsider trying to regulate swaps between foreign US affiliates, quote, merely on the basis that the US located personnel arrange, negotiate, or execute the swap. So what that means is, yeah, the footnote stands, keep the loophole. It doesn't matter that they're actually doing the trades in America. Let them pretend that they're doing it outside the country. Do not regulate the swaps. By the way, Mnuchin was a banker who took advantage of another loophole that caused another collapse, and that was the housing collapse. Mnuchin was an enormous player in that housing collapse. He was rewarded for his failure, which of course was not a failure on his part and the bankers' parts. They made millions upon millions of dollars. But the world economy collapsed, and Donald Trump thought, oh, someone who robs from everyone else to give to the rich, he'd make a perfect Treasury Secretary for the elites. And he did, this. Guys, it's causing inflation now. And the way that the article is being received online as, oh my God, that's definitely true. Holy cow, right? Is showing you that you've got the inflation problem, but you also have a second giant problem that now everybody's nervous about. Once these guys start doing unregulated gambling, which is exactly what this is, a global economic collapse is pretty much guaranteed. It's exactly what happened last time. It's just that in that case, they were doing all the gambling on housing. They have now moved the gambling to commodities, oil, food products, etc. But it's gambling either way. There is no known scenario in the world history where you have unregulated gambling where people didn't lose all their money. Okay, so buckle up, brace for impact. When they took away regulations, those are laws that are meant to protect everyone. They turned it into a bad word. The Republicans said, oh, they're over-regulating. Can you believe they're regulating the poor corporations? The corporations are the most angelic figures in the world, our beloved corporations. You can't regulate them. You don't want to regulate bankers. You want to let them make massive, uncontrolled bets. Some of those guys are going to lose those bets, and then they're not going to have the money. And then they're gonna come to the government and say, give me another goddamn bailout. And guess what they're gonna do? And on this one, it doesn't matter if it's Biden or Trump. They're definitely gonna give them our money. You can take that, ironically, to the bank.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.